Hi, this is Justin Slocum Bailey from Vocis Digital, here to share with you some of the top findings from research in second language acquisition for language teaching. I don't know about you, but as a teacher, I like to know that the things I'm doing in the classroom or the things I'm thinking about doing have a solid foundation in research. Research isn't the only thing to base our instruction on. We can also use our own experience and the experience of other teachers we trust, but research can give us a solid starting point, give us new ideas, increase our confidence in what we do, and help us explain to others, and if necessary, defend what we do. There are lots of areas of research relevant to teaching and learning languages: social science, cognitive science, linguistic science, but in this video, I'll focus on how a few of the main practices common in acquisition-driven instruction, or ADI, align with results of research in linguistics, and especially the area of linguistics called second language acquisition, or SLA. By the way, the term second language acquisition is the standard term, even if it's actually someone's third or fourth or 10th language, in contrast to just language acquisition, which by definition refers to a young child acquiring their first language. This video won't address every practice associated with ADI or every relevant piece of SLA research, just a few pairings that I find especially illuminating or encouraging. ADI principles or practices I'll highlight include repeated exposure to comprehensible input, focusing on form in context while mainly focusing on meaning, sheltering vocabulary rather than grammar, incorporating variety or novelty, and being patient and trusting the process. Let's dive in. The first item is repeated exposure to comprehensible input. I put this one first, not just because it's the most recognizable aspect of ADI, but also because it's probably the most widely agreed upon thing among SLA researchers. Like in any scientific field, there's plenty of controversy in SLA, but there's general agreement that comprehensible input is the main driver of acquiring a language. Where some discussion comes up is over questions like whether we can structure that input a certain way to speed up the process, or whether the learning that happens primarily through exposure to comprehensible input can be enhanced or complemented by more explicit instruction. As far as why comprehensible input is so important and so effective, there are a number of reasons, but I will highlight just one, which is that the rules about a language that tend to feature heavily in textbooks are not actually real features of a language, which are much more complex and sometimes even contradict those textbook rules. In other words, the information about language that we tend to see in textbooks often doesn't accurately represent even the language itself, let alone how language is processed or stored in the brain of someone who speaks the language. And there's far more to a language and to using a language than any textbook or even an 8-year sequence of language courses, let alone a 3 or 4-year sequence, could ever hope to convey. Fortunately, the human brain seems to be really good at picking up the actual language, given enough exposure to communication in the language, that's input, which in turn can only be processed if it's understood, that's the comprehensible part. The second core feature of ADI I want to highlight is that when we focus on the form of language, we do it in the context of communication in the language, which is mainly focused on meaning. This is partly for the practical reason already mentioned, which is that if we tried to teach explicitly all the forms of words and clauses and sentences commonly used in communication, we'd never pull it off. There's just too much. Another reason is that acquisition seems to happen largely through making form-meaning connections over and over again. And with out-of-context forms, the meaning part that form is supposed to connect to is missing. Out-of-context forms are rarely incorporated into the learner's overall picture of the language and ability to actually use the language, partly because an out-of-context form doesn't really have a peg in the brain on which to hang, and partly because the actual meanings and uses of a word are influenced by the words around them in a sentence and in a longer string of language. In the words of one of the giants of SLA research, Michael Long, of all the many studies on language learning done in and out of the classroom, quote, "None suggests anything but an accidental resemblance between the way learners acquire a second language and the way a focus on forms out of context assumes they do," end quote. Now, in case you sometimes feel, well, I learned language with a lot of focus on forms out of context, like conjugations or declensions, I'll share this gem from the same article by Michael Long. Quote, "The assertion that many students all over the world have learned languages via a focus on forms ignores the possibility that they've really learned despite it, as well as the fact that countless others have failed," end quote. So when I'm teaching, I want to stake what I do not just on what I feel has sometimes worked for me, but on what extensive research suggests actually works reliably for people in general. And that's a focus primarily on meaningful communication, with occasional brief timeouts to focus on form when there's a breakdown in conveying meaning. And this takes us right to the next principle, which is to shelter vocabulary more than grammar. We can't throw everything at students at once, so we have to pick some ways to tone it down, some ways to take it easy on students' working memories. And a common way to do that is by trying very carefully to limit ourselves to only using certain grammar. For example, only using one tense for a while, and then introducing one more, and using only those two for a while, and so on. Or by focusing on only one type of verb or one type of pronoun for a while before introducing any others. In tandem with that approach, it's not uncommon to present pretty hefty lists of vocabulary, sometimes all around a certain topic, and to use all of that vocab with the one or two grammatical forms that we've introduced. But a lot of research suggests that the opposite approach, limiting vocabulary more carefully while using grammar more freely and naturally, leads to the best results. Given exposure to plenty of input, learners can actually acquire far more elements of a language than they're explicitly taught. Not only that, but learners often acquire completely different elements of a language than a teacher or textbook is trying to teach. This seems to be because at different points in the language learning journey, a learner's brain becomes ready to acquire a certain feature of the language. You can think of it as the acquisition that's already happened, unlocking certain features of the language, but not others. Now, the odds of the one grammar topic that a teacher or textbook is focused on being the very thing that's been unlocked for every student, or even most students in a class, are incredibly slim. But if we speak more naturally and present our students with texts and other natural communication, then over time, each learner will be exposed to the exact things their brain is actually ready for. Our next ADI practice is to incorporate variety and novelty. In addition to the benefits of variety and novelty for attention and motivation, which are huge, to acquire the range of meanings and uses of a word or construction, you need to encounter and understand it in a variety of contexts. A lot of the meaning of a word or construction actually comes from its context in a sentence or interaction and is different in different contexts. This is true not just for obvious examples, such as the word bank, which can refer to a place that deals with money, or to the strip of land along the edge of a river. It's also true for countless function words and even word endings, even for something as seemingly straightforward as the plural s. Take the words cat and cats. If you ask someone what's the difference, someone might say, well, the second one refers to more than one. Okay, well, what if I say the sentence, cats are goofy? Am I just saying more than one cat is goofy? No, at least in my dialect of English, that way of phrasing it doesn't just mean there's more than one cat that's goofy. It's actually making a general claim that all cats, or cats in general, are goofy. Now let's take that same sentence, cats are goofy, and add a the to the front. The cats are goofy. Now it's no longer all cats or cats in general. It's some specific cats, most likely my cats, or maybe some cats we were just talking about. And by the way, this raises a quirk not just about the plural s, but also about a word as common as the article the. Because if I say, I gotta pick up the cats from the vet, or sorry I can't come, I gotta watch the kids. There, the word the actually kind of means my. If I say, can't come, gotta watch the kids, I'm talking about my kids. But you'll never see an English language textbook that tells you that one of the definitions of the word the is my. But an English speaker is going to understand that from the sentence I said. Last but not least, be patient and trust the process. This actually follows from just about all the points made so far. It just takes a lot of time for all the repeated understanding to happen and for the connections between form and meaning to take hold. But it's also widely observed in SLA research that the process of acquisition can just be messy. It can be unpredictable. It can also be cyclical, where a form seems to have been acquired, but then it seems to be lost again before coming back permanently. A famous example is when a learner of English correctly uses went as the past tense of go, and you think, yes, they got it. But then starts saying goed, and you think, oh, I thought they had it. But that's actually evidence that acquisition is happening. It's evidence that the learner has soaked up that addition of de to indicate past tense. They're just over-applying it, over-generalizing it to the word go right now, and eventually they catch up and realize that specifically for the word go, it's not goed but went. If the learner were tested and graded during that middle phase, they'd be wrong even though they're right there on a natural path toward acquiring the past tense. So we want to be patient with learners, all of whom are at different points on the trajectory of acquisition, and ideally we want that patience to be reflected in the ways we give feedback and scores. By the way, this can also help us be more patient with ourselves. I know I sometimes get down on myself as a teacher when I feel like students aren't progressing the way I thought they were or thought they would. The information from this video helps me remind myself, Justin, be patient. You're doing the right things. Trust the process. That's all for now. To recap, we've talked about research-informed reasons for repeated exposure to comprehensible input, focusing on form in context while mainly focusing on meaning, sheltering vocabulary more than grammar and speaking naturally, incorporating variety and novelty, and being patient and trusting the process. Have fun out there.